All right, hello everybody. System Chalk here with a much delayed entry into the Roguelike Dev does the Complete Roguelike tutorial session. So we are on to week 8, which is the end of the series. But I'm recording this on the 31st of August, so this is the first time that I've actually recorded a video for the event after that particular week has ended. I think it says here that basically there's sharing Saturday. Um, so I kind of figured that today was really the last day for me to record anything. I'm not expecting any like magic in terms of where I'm going. I should probably be careful. All right, now all of you know the subreddits that I'm looking at. I probably shouldn't have expanded that screen. All right, well that's life. Um, but data is beautiful actually very often does not produce beautiful data. But that's fine. We'll leave it aside. So anyways, um, the fact of the matter is that since the last video, I have had a really busy time at work. This is more relevant to sort of the people who watch my stream and things like that. But in January, I started a new job. Absolutely love it. But it is like I had a serious job before, but this is also a serious job, but it is one that I like personally, um, like I'm very invested in. It's the sort of job that I really enjoy putting everything into, a given day. And that sometimes means that if there's a lot to do or if there's, something that I'm sort of on a roll on, it's one of these ones where I'm a little bit more willing to put that extra time in. So on top of the fact that I have this natural inclination to, if I'm honest, overwork a bit, but in sort of a benign way. And my bosses are actually very good at sort of letting me know, hey, you know, one, you don't need to stay any longer than your usual time. And also just checking in to make sure that I'm okay, because they really are quite conscious about burnout and not wanting that to happen. But it really is joy for me to do that. I mean, not every second is fun, but yeah, as it is, it has been quite a busy time at work. So on this kind of combined with my natural inclination to sort of overdo it, and just as a practical matter, it has meant that for the last week or so, whenever I've had sort of a spare block of time, one of two things has happened. Either I've been catching up on the stuff that I've neglected before, or I've just been sort of going home and just kind of immediately falling asleep. So that's my excuse for not posting anything. But there is a little bit of a shame in the sense that the one thing I really wanted to try and do, the original plan that I had for this was that I was going to I was going to finish off um, the roguelike tutorial. And finishing it off for me was basically, I did not want Rough to, or MyPy or anything like that, to be giving me specific errors. Like either I will have consciously chosen to suppress that error for a good reason, or I would, I would fix whatever was there. And I also kind of wanted to take that as an opportunity to really get into sort of thinking about what a good doc string is and things like that. And I'll confess, I sort of rushed through them. But I think what I will maybe do, one of the things that I've personally really got out of this is a lot of nice signposts in terms of the things that I really should be looking at for future projects. And so this leads me into what I wanted this video to be, because I'm sort of conscious of the fact that any time for me to implement new things is basically gone, at least in the context of the Complete Roguelike tutorial event. I wanted this to be sort of a wrap up to talk a little bit about the project, maybe something that I would have done alternatively in terms of different directions. I have a mechanism that I'm going to use to make sure that I don't spend too much time talking about that. And then one thing I'd really like to do is actually go through this page and just give, for everybody who made it to the end, to just sort of point to those names and, give a minute in terms of just seeing what everybody else did, because I've occasionally been checking in on a few things. But I haven't really gone all the way through and looked at every single entry, except that, whenever I'm checking my own stuff, right? So if I see a reply to a comment, I might see what's inside the thread, but I'm I'm not regularly watching it, and it's really clear that there are people in the community who are. And so I figured the way that I can finish it would be to at least spend a little bit of time, thinking about this project, talking about maybe some ideas in terms of where the extension would be, some things that I learned, and then of course to finish off with a big thank you to everyone who, to the people who made this a really, really special event. So with all of that in mind, let's jump into the session. There is actually a couple of little changes that I'm going to be making to this, but let's, what am I going to do? Okay, yeah, actually, you know what? The best thing to do is do the change. So first of all, we have currently got yet another roguelike tutorial. Now that's not the name of the game. Under the setup game, it calls it Tombs of the Ancient Kings. So we're gonna keep that. I kind of feel like because I haven't added anything new, I want to make sure I basically want to keep keep consistent with what the game has, and as a result, I didn't put my name in yet, but I figure what we can do here. I think it does 2 lines. I think we might be able to do. I think that might work. We'll give this a try when we go to main. Well, that didn't work. Did I do the wrong escape key, maybe? This is an embarrassing start. I think that's the problem. Oh, hang on. No, it's because I did R. Right. It's actually the opposite. I shouldn't do the R. I mean, it's a little off center. I'm not crazy about that, but I'll take it. Although let's make that grammatical and say the. Okay. Credit where credit is due. So what I'm going to do here, the thing that I kind of want to do as part of this little exercise, I'll actually make a text file. I'm probably going to just throw away the text file at the end of this, but what I would like to do as part of this last video, this is sort of a coda to the event, but what I want to do is actually take some time with the game, play it through, see how I feel about it, and talk a bit about maybe some of the things I would want to follow up on, as well as some of the suggestions. I should actually make a comment as well. It seems like a few members of the community have visited the videos and have left some comments on them. Now, I don't know if this is a YouTube thing or if maybe just people have changed their mind and if they've removed the comment. But on occasion, what I will see in my YouTube videos is that there will be a comment. Like the number of comments is not 0. Usually it's like 1. But when I go in, even when I remove like the spam filter or something like that, it will not actually show me any comments. Now, obviously, this is not unique to YouTube. There's plenty of social media companies which don't accurately report the number of interactions. But it does make me a bit worried that people have commented on things and that I'm missing out on them. And in fact, I was wanting to follow up on some specific advice because I believe it was hexadecimal, if I'm not mistaken. My apologies if I'm crediting the wrong individuals. But there was actually a little bit in terms of some follow-up for this, things that I could do in terms of follow-on activities. And unfortunately, while I remember getting that comment, and I believe I replied to it, I haven't actually been able to find that in my YouTube list anymore. And so the real shame here is that I'm kind of flying blind on this. And of course, this is combined with the fact that I just didn't have the time to do the things that I wanted. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and recall, the at least the gist of what was done. I'm going to add that to the ideas list. But overall, my plan here is just going to be to go through the game, talk a little bit about some of the different ideas that I had over the course, and then maybe by the end of it, once I sort of have a few different ideas in terms of things that I might change or things that I might want to do or implement, I'll talk a little bit about maybe the ordering of them, how difficult I think that they would be, and then we can do sort of a final wrap up and sign off for the event, because I would, ideally if I can, like to make the end of the video about the community rather than me. So I'm going to start a timer here. So I'm only going to give myself 30 minutes to do this. And I realize only 30 minutes. That means that this is going to be a 40 minute or longer video already. That may be too much. If I run out of steam, I'm going to leave it behind. But I did want to give myself a definitive end to this whole thing, because again, I don't really think anybody needs the dreaded ideas guy. But I think it would be kind of fun just to go through this and say, okay, what are the things that I'm thinking as I play this? So one idea that was mentioned, I think this was in the comment, but make an installer, right? So when I get a game on Steam, if I get a game, on itch, anything that I do in terms of interacting with games, it's not a Python script, or it's not a set of Python scripts. There is something that is put together that not only just installs it on my computer, but specifically it installs it on my computer, and it does so in a way that does not cause all of the security features of the of the computer to freak out, right? So that actually strikes me as something that would be very important and very useful to learn, because while my day-to-day experience still is just doing, kind of Kleenex programs or just some Python scripting that doesn't really require a lot of long-term thinking, the purpose of doing this exercise was to actually grow. And I think the process of figuring out how to do this sort of stuff and do it in a way that wouldn't make people feel safe using the software that I write, I think that's just something that would allow me to learn quite a bit. And this will actually tie into a couple of things that I'll do after the roguelike event that aren't necessarily related. It's not directly related to this project. It's related to something else that I was doing. But it's sort of one of these opportunities to grow here. So that was one. That one came externally, and thank you for that, because I actually think these are the types of suggestions I really like the most, because they're the sort of thing that I personally don't think of. And yet it is clear to see just how useful that is to learn. It's actually, I know I'm eating into my half hour, but the reason I really like these examples, it comes down to some of my first encounters with computer science. So prior to going into university, and I think I told this previously in the videos, but I think it's worth mentioning. Prior to going to university, I did try to learn through MOOCs, but they probably weren't called MOOCs at the time, but like basically, there'd be a series of videos either on YouTube or, it'd be something self-hosted, and it would be, they'd teach you Java or something like that, and they'd usually have this nice little library to make things a lot simpler for you. But the problem is that because these libraries weren't maintained, I could sort of handle the idea of not necessarily having a TA to talk to, or not having any kind of hand-holding. But unfortunately, because there were incompatibilities between the version of Java that I could get and what was put out into the world, the challenges I was running into, it wasn't very clear what were conceptual difficulties in terms of understanding this subject. And what was just, outdated instructions for a tutorial that had not been maintained for a year or two or longer. So I had sort of failed to learn any kind of programming a couple times over, and doing practical projects and, trying to do small scale things definitely helped. But I really only got it insofar as I have got it. Obviously, I think some may question how much I actually know. But, all told, when it finally clicked and I felt like I was at a point where I could consult references and have a fighting chance of being able to, um, being able to learn something or add something new. Essentially, just I'd know if I was out of my depth in reading a book, but I could sort of get myself the stairway to getting to that level of knowledge where I could handle that book. I really feel like I got that in university, because it's one of these things where having that structure and forcing you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do, that really helped. That was one of these things where I'm not just limiting myself to problems that I find interesting or I can do right away, but I'm specifically doing things that make me better on a relative basis. Again, I know I'm not a particularly good programmer. I'm doing the things that will make me better, but there are things that I will struggle with and I will think that I can't do at the time. So, I'm sure that says something about me and my learning style. I definitely know that there are people who are quite successful at this who are largely self-taught or haven't gone through university, but it's something that I personally found very beneficial. And I do tend to find that these sorts of things really do help. So another example would be, doing logging instead of print statements and such. That's another example of where it is more difficult to do in principle, and yet it is very clear how that is something that that would be, good for a number of different reasons. So anyways, that would be one, and I'd actually rate that fairly high. Now, actually, before we go into the game, there was another one that I was talking about. So I'm a little disappointed I didn't get to pursue this. But I was thinking a little bit about roguelikes in general. And specifically, we do have an open session? We do. Okay. So, we'll play a new game, right? We're inside here, and we've got a little @ sign. We've got an O representing an orc. We've got, various shades of yellow to represent the world. And I thought one of the things that's kind of fun here, and we've got the hello and welcome adventure to yet another dungeon. And there was also that time when I misunderstood, or not misunderstood, but basically I didn't tab enough times in terms of the confusion spell. And one of my silly solutions was to basically keep a bug in, but solve it through text. And I was thinking about this a little bit, right? I definitely prefer this to the old style, but the fact of the matter is we read a little bit of a history of Rogue, and people really enjoyed it, right? There is a reason why there is a genre of derivatives of this type of game, and it's one that really does seem to have a lot of sort of life and vitality in it. People still seem to be finding interesting new ways of sort of riffing on this. And, maybe even not even, we don't even need to think about the cutting edge in terms of today, even something like Crypto the Necrodancer, right? And I know I keep referring to this. It just happens to be one that I like and that I've played recently. There's so much that you can get out of this, and there's different ways that people have handled it. But I think one of the big things that I noticed, particularly in the projects for the RoguelikeDev RoguelikeDev community, will be that they do kind of have that old school aesthetic. So again, this is taking advantage of some modern tools. It looks quite a bit nicer than maybe some of the alternatives, but it's definitely representing this dungeon in a very abstract way. And the enjoyment sort of comes out of the process of sort of putting yourself into the shoes. You don't really think this @ symbol is you, but you're allowing your imagination to go. And I think one of the things that there's a few reasons why I wanted to spend some time thinking of this, and it's one reason why I actually think I would like to pursue some form of this idea down the road. Because when I was little, my dad used to listen. So we had a lot of road trips, several hours going from where I was born to this destination. And my dad really liked listening to audiobooks, and he also really liked listening to BBC radio dramas. So I got to hear a lot of those. And that, in addition to being somebody who really liked reading, that really gave me an appreciation for the types of stories and the types of entertainment that rely on a little bit of the audience filling in the blank. Now, just to be clear on this, I am not trying to knock games and I'm not trying to knock movies. In fact, in a previous career, I worked in movies and in the camera department. So like, and out of any artistic form that I'm okay at, I would argue that I'm probably a better photographer than anything. So, I do not want to suggest at all that like TV or film is somehow some lesser representation, because in fact, some of the best films do actually allow some room for the imagination to run around. But I think one of the things that's interesting about roguelikes, and specifically the ones that I've been seeing as part of the RoguelikeDev events and just sort of browsing through that subreddit, is I really feel that this is a genre which at least derives some of its power through the ability to give people that space to fill in the blanks themselves. Now, again, I'm not at all trying to suggest here that, people are sitting down and, writing a full, short story based on their roguelike runs. No, they're having the experience of going through the dungeon and having that, just having some fun. But I do think that there's enough there, right? Even with the simple graphics, I think there is something in between, a pure, I'm an icon moving on a screen, making numbers go up. And, this is, full-on text adventure, or, some sort of Sierra / LucasArts / Telltale / I don't know. I'm sure there's a couple of other like narrative heavy studios, but like I think there's something in between these two, and I think probably you could probably classify a few different roguelikes along this spectrum of sort of pure, numbers and mechanics, and ones that are maybe a little bit more on sort of the narrative side. And again, as somebody who's a bit of a reader and somebody who appreciates the opportunity to try and build a scaffolding that a player might be able to draw something out of. I feel like there's something going on there, and I feel that actually, in particular, the roguelike and this style of roguelike has some opportunities to play around. But I'm also a little bit of a clown, and so I really had this idea of putting my own stamp on this tutorial, and again, I may do it later, to make Rouge. So the idea out of this one was I made a lot of typos over this, and I'm still going to make lots of typos. But I actually think that there's some mileage that I can get out of this idea, because in the end, right, I'm relying on the text to map these entities that I see on the screen to something in my imagination. And so I was just starting to think, well, what are some of the typos or some of the transpositions that I can play around with to have some fun? So like for an orc, for instance, well, you've got the same letters as rocks, and I guess rocks tend to be considered more powerful creatures. So there can be this sort of process of learning based on the interactions. And, again, you don't want this to be the pull the rug out from under somebody. You thought this was a weak creature and now you're dead. That's unpleasant. But the more you think about it, the more opportunities you have to play around with some of the different items and some of the different names of creatures, just purely by going on sort of misinterpretation and I guess wordplay would be like a better term. So I'll put one in here, typos, wordplay, world is not as it seems. Okay, now, it's kind of, I guess people think it's impolite to laugh at your own jokes. I think this is kind of a cute idea, but the thing about the cuteness is that this is not going to sustain a game, right? This will maybe sustain a level or two as people go through. So one of my favorites that I was thinking of is like you could have an enemy, a Brian in a jar, right, instead of a brain in a jar. And just it's one of these ones where I liked this as an idea because when you first think of that, right, when you think I'm making Rouge, the game of typos, and again, it's not just typos, but it's specifically on playing with the fact that the player is relying on you to provide accurate information. So essentially, we're introducing the unreliable narrator to the game. It's a fun little way of playing with the simplified visuals, and it's a way of saying that even in the modern day, this game doesn't work if you actually have better rendering. So this is one of the things where you want to be really clear in terms of why you're doing it, because otherwise then it's just a cute little joke and, okay, that's good for 15 seconds. What else have you got, right? Is this game actually any fun? But the more I sort of thought about this, there's another thing that you can do, which is items are inconsistent between playthroughs. Right? So this is part of the procedural generation or the repetition. So the idea here, and I'm taking this actually from Eric's game Into Ruins. I don't know if this was a specific convention inside of original roguelikes, but like in Eric's game, there are these orbs that you use, but you don't know what the orbs do. Some of them will give you boosts. Some of them will give you sort of drawbacks. And I think Brogue might actually do this as well. But anyways, I've definitely seen, and actually maybe ToeJam and Earl. I've seen more ToeJam and Earl than I've played it, but yeah, there seems to be some convention of not consistently having the same effects for, at the very least, like potions. And I actually like this idea of having to learn a little bit more. So in this case, it seems to be following in a tradition, but it's adding a little bit of its own spin just because of the sleight of hand that's happening with the text. But then you have the next part, which is, for lack of a better name, the Dictionary of Yendor, right? Or it'd be even funny if it was Rodney's Dictionary, because of course Yendor is Amulet of Yendor. Yendor is Rodney backwards. So and at that point, it's like, okay, so you get down to the bottom. Maybe you're looking for the Tome of Yendor, and it turns out to be Rodney's Dictionary when you pick it up. And that signals that there's a change in this world. And then at that point, you get to see things for what they really are. And of course, at that point, you might say off of that, so this would require a very careful selection of enemies or something like that. But if you pick different names for things and they have several different interpretations, or maybe you just say it's like, okay, we're just going to go with typos. We're just going to go with sort of hard to tell names or something like that. But basically something where people are feeling a little uncertain of what they're encountering. So it's not just that you're feeling that uncertainty with items, but you're feeling uncertainty with enemies, right? So you can see a form that's coming after you, but until you actually encounter it, you don't know if it's something extremely dangerous or something that's, something you can take on a few of at a time. And essentially, through getting the dictionary or Rodney's Dictionary, you're going to be better informed. And that's what you use to sort of get to the top. So the reason why I'm pursuing this idea, right, is that, I start off, again, sometimes it's just fun to have a little bit of a chuckle. It's like, yes, Rouge. But the more I sort of thought of it, the more I kind of liked the fact that it seemed to be mapping with things that already existed inside of roguelikes. And so I was sort of wondering, like, it's one of these things where I'm sort of like, okay, so we have this idea of misunderstanding, and specifically the misunderstanding that happens between the way that roguelikes are represented into the on the screen versus the world that's being brought on. So how far can we go with that? How much of that, becomes gameplay? And I actually think that there's quite a bit that you can do with that. These are the ones that I'm sort of coming up with off the top of my head. The only ones that I actually had, I think, so Rouge was one that I'd been, this was an idea that I had when I had a typo, like probably 4 or 5 videos ago. The items that are inconsistent between playthroughs, I think I might have had an idea along those lines before. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this is just sort of improvising based off of this idea, and I suspect I'm actually running it. Yeah, I got 10 minutes, and I've only really got 2 ideas on here. But this is the sort of idea that, to me, let's be honest here. I'm not gonna. If I were to implement this, it's very unlikely that I would see revenue off of it. But it's something that I'm reasonably excited by, and I think I could probably do enough with to sustain a project, something that I sort of think would be, you know what, this is worth the time, and I feel like I would learn something in this process. So that's another idea. And again, I'm sure I could have spent like another 10 or 15 minutes sort of expanding on this idea here. But I actually kind of like the fact that, again, it has an alignment with certain things that have previously existed inside of roguelikes. And so I feel that it's not just it's like a one pun and you're done, but it's more like, okay, we can actually get a bit of mileage out of this and see, like, make a coherent game sort of around this admittedly extremely silly conceit. But if we're getting Rodney's dictionary and we're running back up, then it's going to be one of the things that I talked about earlier, implement going upstairs. Okay, so refill the dungeon. And off of that, how do we make sure the player doesn't farm the levels? How do we make sure that they want to make some progress through the dungeon as well? Now, again, that may not be necessary, right? Like they could just be that this is an incredibly bleak, game where it's entirely about trying to get further and further in the dungeon before you're wiped out. This is one thing that I kind of like to do. And the reason why I like this idea particularly is that it's taking something that's already implemented inside of the game and it's seeing whether or not I can extend that. And it's not extending it as in adding something to entity factories or equipment types, but it's specifically adding something that says, okay, so there's now this idea of sort of a persistence between the levels, but I want to give people a reason for going back up. So maybe they want to go back up because there is an end game. You pick up an item and you go back up. But what is the challenge? Like, are you just going to go through a bunch of empty floors? That's not very interesting. Can you go back up if you don't have Rodney's dictionary? Actually, I suppose in that case there you might it might actually be fun to play with that and have an idea of like directions, right? You can't you can't find your way back, or you only wind up going down unintentionally. You can't read the signs going up or down. I don't know, there's a few different ways that you can play around with that. But yeah, that one, I think just because there was something already present inside the game, it seems like it would be straightforward to implement, but I actually don't know how the game handles persistence. And more importantly, if you're giving the player the opportunity to do something, what reason do they have to do that, right? And in this case here, going back up the stairs in this particular roguelike doesn't really count for a whole lot. And by the way, you'll also notice, right, this is a huge difference between the sorts of suggestions that I'm getting externally versus internally, right? I'm getting really excited about, what does this game look like? What are the ideas that I can put into the game? And that would be exhausting if somebody else had to implement that, right? This is stuff that I have to learn. How hard is this stuff to implement? Does it actually add the value? This is kind of like an old Simpsons episode where like Homer gets to design his own car and it's just this absolute nightmare. So, if I get in that mode too much, then that's going to happen. And so, the one flaw with these ideas is that, make an installer is by far the most useful and the most instructive, whereas these ones are hopefully designed to help me understand what a game is and what would be fun about a game. But it's it is very much me getting into I'm excited about making something mode. One other one that I talked about earlier, I think I'm getting short on time. A mad weakness at start. How much heat up a player at start without making them quit? No equipment at the start. Mad scramble to find something to survive. So this is one I talked about in a previous video. There was, I think before the weapons were fully implemented inside of the game, there was, it was really hard to take out like orcs and things like that. And it was, I actually really liked that, but it was a little too hard. So I wanted to see, is there a way that I can make it so that you are on the run at the start? Actually, I'll write this here. On the run at the start, then fight baddies. So there's sort of this idea in terms of the different phases. So at the very start of the game, you feel quite weak, and you know that you have to do something in the dungeon. You know you need to find those items. But looking for those items necessarily entails danger. And once you find those items, now you're actually hunting the enemies. But again, you still want to be kind of careful about that. Maybe you want to go and find a couple of healing potions before that happens. That actually leads me to another one, which is make the enemies really more difficult as the player descends. So making the enemies gradually more difficult as the player descends is really about the fact that the way you beat this game is to get your defense up so that you can just laugh at the enemies. Then you get your power up to, just one-shot them. And then you're just sort of laughing to the XP bank all the way through. So, and that one I actually sort of feel like I would have an okay handle on. I actually was talking with somebody about 4X games in a local game dev meetup, and they sort of said, like, this is normally the sort of thing that we would, discourage. It wasn't like I was planning on making a 4X, but I sort of said, I was talking a little bit about like the concept of an indie 4X, and the details of the conversation don't matter that much, but somebody sort of said, it's like, yeah, it's the sort of thing I would normally discourage somebody from making. I think they thought I was talking, I was sort of soft floating the idea of making one of these. I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to make a 4X, but they sort of said, like, I'd normally discourage somebody from that, but you're very comfortable with numbers and, just generally sort of a statty sort of thing. So it's actually something you might be interested in doing. And again, I mean, this is somebody's assessment of my character, not necessarily my design abilities, but I do think that there's some truth to that I do be a bit, no, I am a bit, not numbers oriented, but I do tend to like thinking in terms of systems and how these things sort of work with each other. I particularly like it when I'm able to try and quantify something that people think is unquantifiable. It's something I wind up doing a lot, actually. And it's always fun because the people will tell me you can't do that, and then they see the results and they want to use the results. So it's always the same. So it's one of these things where I feel like, I probably wouldn't have an experience like that with a roguelike, but I feel like getting into the game and playing around a little bit with some of the parameters to make it so that it's engaging in every level. I feel like that would be an interesting challenge, and one that would sort of it's not easy, but it's challenging enough that it speaks to things that I like to do and might be able to do, while still providing a worthwhile experience for a player. So that's one on the list that I wanted to think of. Unfortunately, I didn't really get to play the game a whole lot. I was sort of free associating on this. So let's see if we can see more of what's going on. So yeah, I'm already at half health, but I've got a health potion. Now this is after I've got the leather armor and the dagger, so that's not too bad. I'm dead. Ah, now here's one. Make an escape to main menu. Don't just quit when the player dies. Oh, that brings me to an idea. Do something with the message log. Present. Oh, that's my timer. So let's so I'll just say a graph of the player's activity. So what I'm thinking of here, if you play Civilization or Old World or Gladius, Warhammer 40k, or other way around, Warhammer 40k Gladius, you kind of have the like here's where the game started, and you get to see your borders go out and so on and so forth. And there is a game that I did with a game developer known as Cheeseness or Valiant Cheese. It's on itch, called Supply Chain. Now it's not probably worth going out and trying, but one of the things that I really wanted to try and do with that, this was done during the COVID-19 pandemic, and Cheese had an idea about supply chains and the reason why toilet paper was hard to find. And I'm an economist, so this is very much my my field. So we do actually have different opinions on the matter. So some of the fun of this was actually balancing the game in a way that made him happy that his particular view was being communicated. But I actually feel that mine is more consistent with how the game plays. And I like the fact that it has this nice property where it, to a certain extent, it tells people what they want to think. But I always do enjoy sort of telling people this very, I like giving them the neoliberal interpretation. I shouldn't say it. That doesn't imply that I am some, that maybe wouldn't be representative of my full views, depending on your definition. But yeah, it was a little fun that I offer people this other perspective on their takeaway and how it was supported by some of the things inside the game. So it was a fun and certainly an educational experience. But one of the things that I really wanted and pressed for, and I think he was probably already inclined to do this, but because it's basically about managing sort of different stages along the life of toilet paper, from production to consumption, tastefully, you don't get to see someone, on the toilet. Well, I shouldn't say fully tastefully. I did have a little fun with the headlines for the newspapers. Some of them are cheeses, though, too. I don't want to take credit. I'll take credit for all the things you like, and all the stuff you didn't like is his contribution. But basically, one of the things I really wanted on this was, even though it's a game that's not really intended to be played for a very long time, I really wanted this idea of being able to go in and see a graph of what each of the different stages of the production would do. It's just one of these things that I like, if you play Anno, or if you play like SimCity, or you play Civilization. Again, these are games that sort of give you visual representations of what happened and how you're doing. And that's something that I kind of like. And so I think there may have been some games that allowed you to sort of print out on paper what happened inside of it. Like you could kind of have a running tally of what was going on. And maybe it was just because you couldn't rely on having like a terminal, or you'd have like a terminal, but you couldn't necessarily have like a screen or be able to go back and see what happened. So, they allowed you to have a hard copy that you could refer to. I'm not entirely sure why that features in certain games, but I kind of like this idea of the fact that the game is already recording past activity. And so being able to take that information, and whether you feed that back into the game to do something in terms of changing the shape of the dungeon or the relative difficulty along those lines. I mean, obviously the character's state is going to be a reflection of all of that, right? Their health is going to be at a certain level. They're going to have certain equipment, so I don't think there's a whole lot that's added there. But being able to do something to sort of put the whole experience together, right? I always like coming back to Civ on this. Are you Dan Quayle or are you Augustus? That sort of thing at the end, I always think is kind of fun. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this. I was hoping that I'd kind of go through some more. I was hoping I could go through some more ideas or play the game a little bit more for generating ideas. But let's do a little bit of time to sort of rank these in terms of difficulty and implementation. I actually think Make an Installer probably belongs right at the top here, because I do think that the this is both like good for me in terms of learning, but I also think like it's like at some point I have played games that were implemented in Python, and it's kind of clear that if you want to make a game today, you can make a game. If you distributing a game, right? Like one of the things about it's a very brutal truth of game development, but some people who make games are not going to have to worry about this. I'm saying this for myself, by the way. Don't need to worry about this stage because nobody's going to play it, or at the very least, the people who play it, well enough that they'll just run some code that you give them. But let's face it, this is something I should learn. So I'd say that one kind of goes high. Now, I really do like this idea here, but this is obviously huge, right? This is really taking this foundation and making a game with it. So this would probably go a bit lower. I'm maybe not going to put it below the message log. But the only thing about this is that I actually think this would really give some value. I would hope that, with enough time and attention, this might even elevate the game to a level where somebody would want to play it. Not just like, okay, I'm doing a nice thing and looking at people's games, but specifically they are like, hey, yeah, I want to try this. Or, maybe that's a little too ambitious for a first game. Maybe it would be, okay, you know what? This is kind of, actually, okay. It's the ambition for this one would be, sometimes the greatest inspiration that you can get for writing is to read something not very good, right? So like I love reading Jonathan Swift. And every once in a while I do get inspired by Jonathan Swift and I actually write something I'm kind of proud of. But more often than not, when I read Jonathan Swift, it's like, oh man, this guy was on fire when he wrote this. I'm never going to be this good. Or worse, you live in the shadow of that and you always sort of do second rate, sort of imitations of these people that you really admire. But sometimes like when you read something from someone, it's just like, oh God, like I could do this. Like that can be a really helpful experience. Also just because like, actually having to go through and articulate why something didn't work is quite instructive on its own. So maybe I'll rein in the ambition a little bit here and just say that my aspiration for Rouge would be to create something that someone says, well, for crying out loud, I can do better than this crap, and then they wind up making the roguelike I like playing. Okay. I think actually under ease of use and like working with things that have been brought in, I think making an escape to main menu button, don't just quit when the player dies, I think that would probably be good on it, because again, it's a little bit like going up the stairs. It's something where we're using tools that the game has already given us without necessarily while adding something that's probably kind of important for the game. So I think probably this would be a good one. Also, I may just be forgetting that there is already a button that does that, but I feel like this is something where I should know the game well enough, the game's internals well enough, that I should be able to implement this on my own. Now here's the thing about going up and down stairs, right? Like I kind of feel like this would be an instructive one, but I don't think it adds a whole lot until I have other materials. So I'll put that under make rouge. And it's not that I think this is easy or this is harder than making rouge, but I just don't think there's any reason to do it until there's other material in the game. Actually, I think I've kind of found an order of these things that I like. So I'm going to unpack a little bit about these two here. So why do I want to put weakness at the start over make enemies gradually more difficult as the player descends? Because there's a number of ways that I can sort of imagine changing this particular file. Like all of this stuff I would want to go and mess around in. But I get an impression that this is... what is it in Princess Bride? Is it the Swamp of Despair? Like with the rodents of unusual size. Anyways, like it's like this is the sort of thing where I imagine that it's incredibly fun for people to play around with procedural generation. And I know my tendencies, right? I'm pretty sure I would love to go in and look at different forms of random number generation and talk about, some of the relative merits of, or what's the difference between like Perlin and simplex noise, and, why was one better, or why is simplex better than, the old Perlin one, and, but, now we're going to move on to using, like, this is the sort of stuff I know I could waste, probably years on, and make absolutely nothing doing. So I get the impression, for me, I think always adding an arm's length element to procedural generation is a nice, exercise in hygiene. Just because I imagine there is a point where you do some of this, like you spend a few days, weeks, months, making yet another procedural generation element, and someone just comes up behind you and says, "And who's having fun again?" So again, if I'm doing something for my own amusement, okay, fair enough, right? Yeah, I'll procedurally generate history, and it'll just be like a first draft of a fantasy novel or something like that. But I sort of feel like being able to move that down, even though that's not a particularly difficult thing to implement, I want to be conscious of the fact that is potentially the gateway drug to wasting a lot of time on procedural generation, when, really a more interesting challenge would be leave the procedural generation as it is, or as much of the procedural generation as possible intact, and make the game as fun as possible within that limitation, right? So don't change the layout of the levels at all, but make a fun game entirely within the levels that are already generated by the game. And then, you say, okay, so the next extension I'll do is I'll now change the number of entities that are created. Or maybe I'll tweak, the relative damage for orcs and trolls or something like that. Which sort of brings me to this idea of like weakness at the start. So I actually quite like this idea. I'm sure there may be playing around a little bit with the procedural generation to that. But what this does, I think, for me in terms of thinking as a game designer, is definitely how do I accept the fact that there's going to be a bunch of different people starting in the same place, and how do I make it, alarming enough that people really feel quite panicked at the start, but not so frustrated that they throw the game away. And I think that would teach me a lot about other people, and what drives people to sort of stay inside of a game. And so there might even be something here with the message log, right? That maybe, I turn this into some, very primitive telemetry of some kind, and, use that to learn a little bit about how people do. But anyways, this is taking a bit longer than I was planning. This is essentially an epilogue here. But let's wrap up the project in terms of committing things. So change the title to Tombs of the Ancient Kings. I already updated the README here, so project is completed the 31st of August, 2024, and attempted to address any warnings as of, and then we're using Python 12. Actually, let me just double check that I've got this right. So conda list. Yeah, so 3.12.5, tcod is almost certainly 6.2.3, and numpy. Oh, I guess we're technically 2.1.0. I know there's like a requirements and all of that, but this is kind of about as concise as I can get in terms of just summarizing why I changed certain things. And then inside of setup game, we made sure that we gave credit where credit is due. So oops. Please enter the commit message for your change, like starting with the hash. Okay. Okay. I'm not sure what I'll do with that ideas text. I really just wanted some sort of representation of how I'm going to do things. So, like I said, I did want to make sure. Okay. I'll talk about my next stages after this, because I really do want to focus on sort of community stuff at the end here. So I do actually have a couple of Python projects that I've been working on, which are more than just my usual. So again, I don't know how many people are familiar with this software, but there's a really good statistical software called Stata. And while it does have, especially since, well, I wasn't there for the earliest days, but I'd say overall its graphical user interface is improved. But the real power of that program is definitely like going into the terminal or writing a little file and writing things. And it's wonderful for econometrics because it is designed in such a way that you probably spend the least amount of time sort of thinking about the code, but you can do just a ton of very arcane and very complicated methods inside of it. So it's quite expensive. I personally don't use it outside of work. But I've worked in a lot of places that do use Stata, and certainly as a university student, I had access to it. And it's one of these things where its great power is definitely using, like writing up scripts. They're like .do files. But again, because this is a piece of software which is really only dedicated to one thing, and they just implement all sorts of weird and exotic methods that you might want, it is one of these cases where, it's perfectly reasonable to just write a do file, which is designed for a specific project. When you submit to a journal, you include the files and so on and so forth. And, clearly all of your idiosyncrasies are going to be present inside of that. And that's just the way that the stuff gets done. Because in the end, these are not people making, you're not making Microsoft Office here. What you're doing is this is an intermediate stage towards getting the insight that you need, which is hopefully, pushing out the frontiers of human knowledge. Obviously, it's not just an economics piece of software. I think, pretty much any social science will wind up using it. And then, of course, there's the free and open source alternatives, and they'll usually let you know in all capital letters that they don't think you should be using it, using Stata. But it's very easy. I think they earn their money. So the the thing is that I've carried that through my usual Python use, right? So I spend a bunch of time in, NumPy, pandas, stats models, scikit-learn, this sort of thing. And I try and make sure that there is some logic, and that basically a user has a fighting chance of kind of going through my notebooks and sort of understanding the journey. But the fact of the matter is that the expectations, both for myself and that my peers have for the work that I do, it's definitely oriented around the written product that I will make, right? The insight, the slide deck, or the report, or whatever it is I'm particularly doing at the time. Very few people are actually going to be taking my code and working with that. Although, if I do, I did get a nice compliment from a coworker, which was like when I made something that was intended for more general use, they did sort of say that, I love it. I love getting it from you because I actually understand what's going on. So again, where I can, I do try to give someone a fighting chance within my own limitations. So one of the things that I wanted to do as a part of this, I mean, one practical matter was just I'd set up this virtual machine. I wanted to try and do a couple of things. And also just, get my development environment a little bit more in order. So Rough is finally working again, almost too well in some cases. And I'm happy about that stuff, right? Because it's the sort of thing that never really bothered me on an individual note, but I sort of realized that I should be doing things that help the technology help me, right? Type hinting. I kind of understood the logical arguments for it. I definitely appreciate how much this helps the development environment help me kind of catch mistakes and just basically do more. And so I don't know. I think that there is I definitely think that there is some value in taking the time and like doing a meatier project that forces me to think about the stuff that I normally wouldn't do. And the fact of the matter is that I look at some of the stuff I did in this other more long-standing project that I'm doing, and there are just some very obvious things from this where I can say, okay, here's like 10 different ways that I can make this project better right now, and it's going to involve redoing a lot of old work, and that never feels good. But I actually feel now that it's a little bit like doing that course at university rather than trying to sort of flounder through some kind of a MOOC. I really feel at this point I have enough of a grasp to be able to say, I may not be able to do this at, my current level here, but I know the things that I need to look at to be able to get to that level. And I think that's a really nice way to go, right? It's like the old saying, you build a man a fire, keep him warm for a day, set a man on fire, keep him warm for the rest of his life. So in this case, I have this to thank for, giving me a bit of an idea in terms of where to look. But I also owe the RoguelikeDev community a big thanks for that. Obviously, there's a bunch of effort that has gone into creating this tutorial. There are people who have put the effort into keeping this going as an annual event. And specifically, some of you have kind of come in and given me some advice in some cases where I have been sort of struggling, or I obviously don't know in terms of how the environment works. And this has been nice because in a lot of cases, I do tend to find that comments online are not always the most constructive, or they're sometimes pointing at the wrong things. And clearly there are things that I need to learn here, right? There's some stuff that was just wrong that I said, or there are clear misconceptions that I had. But I really appreciate that the way that things were presented were ones that allowed me to understand a little bit better in terms of why these things were happening, or what the alternative was, as opposed to, hey, idiot, don't do this. Or then, there's always like, if you do an off by one error and then, you've got, several paragraphs inside of a chat while you're trying to deal with a difficult problem. And it's like, come on, man, like everybody makes this mistake. I don't take that sort of stuff for granted. It's actually a bit of a breath of fresh air. And so it's always nice to encounter that. And hopefully for those of you who followed this that weren't participating in the RoguelikeDev, this can stand as an encouragement to, one, join that community, but number two, to actually take the time and participate, however you define that participation, whether you do a vanilla run like me, or you you try and do something a little bit more independent. I actually do intend, if I can, I mean, I don't know exactly where I'm going to be in a year, but my hope would be that in 2025, I don't just contribute to this event again, but that I'm doing something that is a little bit more independent. Whether or not I follow this little list here, it is something that I felt very warm and welcome to do. And so I would very much like to do that again. So as a closing, I wanted to just take a quick minute here and go through, we'll refresh the page just so that we can see anybody who's implemented things here. So first of all, a big thank you to Kelsey Frog, who I believe has been organizing each of the different weeks. So RoguelikeDev does the Complete Roguelike tutorial week 8. Congratulations and thank you to everyone who participated. As always, it's been fun watching everyone learn and make progress together, or in my case, make mistakes together. This is the end of the RoguelikeDev does the Complete Python tutorial for 2024. Share your game, share screenshots and repos, brag, commiserate. How did it go? Where do you go from here? I encourage everyone who has made it this far to continue working on your game. Everyone is welcome to, and really should, participate in Sharing Saturday. Feel free to enjoy the usual tangential chatting. If you're looking for last week's or any other post, the entire series is archived on the wiki. So on this note, I can't make a promise in terms of how long I'm going to pursue this. I think there is actually a benefit to defining a clear end. So my repo does say that this project was completed on the 31st of August. And there is a side of me that says, if I want to do something like Rouge, wouldn't it be interesting if I say, okay, well, what if I structure this project in a way that maybe makes a little more sense for me? Or, do I want to just try and build off of this? There's two different ways that it can go. I haven't really decided on this. But because there is a local game dev meetup, there is a reason for me to kind of carry on and maybe try and make something out of it. But I'm trying to decide, is this the foundation on which I want to kind of continue building? Or do I say, okay, let's take that as the learning exercise, and now let's try and organize this in a way that maybe I have demonstrated that I understood what was going on. So I'm on the fence about implementation and continuing development, but that's also just a reflection that I'm also implementing some other things which are not game related, and that I feel that I would learn from as well. So anyway, sorry, I didn't want to make that about me, but I just wanted to respond to that. But again, Kelsey Frog, I believe, has been doing all of these updates here, and so that is one that I wanted to bring up. Now, is it Kizrati? So first of all, this is a developer of Cogmind, and I believe they have streamed, but I think this individual has also been, yes, they've been taking care of the directory. So this is another person who I wanted to give a special mention to, because definitely it's nice to just, I like highlighting the people who are in particular doing things to make an environment or a community very welcoming. And in this case here, Cogmind, first of all, looks like a really interesting game. But on top of that, I actually really like the fact that there was somebody kind of keeping track of all the participants, because there was that enforcement, or that kind of commitment mechanism in terms of sending the videos up, and so in this case here, being added to a directory and things like that definitely helped. So Kazrati says, thanks to everyone who participated. Extra thanks to Kelsey Frog for hosting, as usual, Hexdecimal for being such a great libtcod maintainer and all-around helpful dev. Definitely can say that, but I see that Hexdecimal's got a comment below, so I'll take the time there. Plus all the others who helped out the participants here and on the Discord. Now, I did check the, I did join the Discord, but I don't actually participate on Discord that much. I really wish Discord wasn't as popular as it was. I do not like that software, but yeah, I've joined the Discord, but I haven't really participated on that. If you can, drop at least one screenshot or many in this thread, even if you're not quite done. Also a repo link if you haven't already. And if you have one, make sure to say whether you completed all weeks so I can mark it down. I'll be updating the directory with screenshots and additional repos from the thread over the next week. And if you finish at some point down the line after that, feel free to let me know or provide screenshots that I will add, and I'll add them. Even if you don't have a repo, share your screenshots and progress along with the language and any engine lib you used so that I can include you in the annual stats summary I'll be putting together next week. It'll always be interesting to compare the results to previous years, and you can find earlier summaries on the wiki. I'm actually curious how much there's a surge of Godot. I don't want to spend too much time litigating the whole Unity thing, but the funny thing is that I don't imagine this as being the sort of thing that would lend one to do things in Unity, right? So while I can see that there is a boost, like I just don't think there's the push factor in terms of Unity present in here. I should maybe check the annual stats. But the pull factor for Godot may be the fact that people are looking for excuses to learn it. I don't know. I kind of feel like part of this is about using the existing library. So I don't know if Godot is really the environment. Well, no, people are using it, so I should roll that back. I don't know. I liked doing the Python one. Do join in our sharing Saturdays if you'd like to continue with your project. Over the years, a fair number of cool projects, big and small, started their life as tutorial offshoots, and yours could be the same. Okay, well, that's actually encouraging. Maybe I will. This will have a life afterwards. Now, Hexadecimal, again, I owe a big thanks here because Hexadecimal definitely, in terms of the number of comments, and I must apologize, by the way, because there was someone, and the name escapes me right now. Let's actually take, I'll search for it afterwards, but there was someone else who gave a reply, but I know Hexadecimal here has been really nice in just giving me some guidance in terms of some of the particulars. So like things like, hey, I'm getting this rough error here and I'm not 100% sure. Like I'd like a reason to suppress this. And usually the answer is like, yes, suppress it, but it's nice to know why, right? If I just keep saying, okay, I do it because some guy on the internet told me, I'm going to have to hope that every time I run into a Python problem, there's a guy on the internet or girl on the internet. But yeah, I really appreciated this because I feel like I have a better. Again, I'm not going to say that I know it yet. I think there's a lot of work that I need to do to really make this stuff stick in my mind. But I really do think that. I really do think that I was given a few seeds to be able to develop more, if not quickly, then productively. And I'm not talking about I'm talking about like personal development. I feel that I have a set of tools now and a way of looking at things that will allow me to shine a light on some of those like dark and dusty corners that I've been ignoring in terms of my understanding. In fact, one of the things I want to do is go back and reread Fluent Python and see how much of the stuff that maybe just kind of washed over me now has a bit more of like a solid core. And I'm like, okay, no, I get this now. So anyways, big thank you to Hexadecimal. And I it always feels a little bad when I spend too much time on an individual here, but obviously this is an individual who I owe the library that this tutorial relied so heavily on, but also the fact that they took the time and they helped people and me specifically. And of course, I think there's a lot of people who have really benefited from this. So wanted to take the time to acknowledge that. It's also one of the projects I'm most interested in. So GitHub repo, Python 3.12 using Python TCOD and TCOD ECS. So I have a slight idea in terms of entity component systems, but like this is definitely a case where I want to see how this project was done. I want to see what the entity component system provides, and is this something I would maybe want to pursue? So I didn't do much, but I at least have to fix the inventory list. Items are now assigned to keys and can stack with similar items. Stacking is perhaps too zealous, as I assume equipment will stack as well. I set up PyInstaller and I built my project for the usual platforms, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, using the GitHub CI. Actually, this would be a good one for me to follow up as well. So there we go. I really don't know any of the extra, like GitHub is just a place where I save a repository, right? It's like a free hard drive on the internet. As usually happens, using the latest version of PyInstaller causes Windows to suspect the executable is a Trojan. Okay, that's one thing that I'm going to have to worry about, but using the second latest version gives fewer false positives. Good to know. PyInstaller has changed their directory layout since the last time I used it. The internal directory is nice for one folder mode, but I did not expect the data assets to be stored there as well. I had to relearn how to access these files and ended up using _file for the moment. Okay, and relevant link. So I'm definitely going to spend some quality time looking on this one. Now that I've finished, I have a lot to think about. It now feels like the mouse input is overrated, at least until libtcod has better support for UI elements. I need to figure out more about save migration. I was able to do the minimum of not crashing on loading or playing older saves, but the outdated state usually left the game as an entertaining buggy mess until I started a new game. I find myself unsure of how to extend the tutorial beyond refactoring its existing elements. The end result isn't much, but it's done, and the code is clean, extendable, up-to-date, and documented. It could work well as a template for future projects. It could also help me with rewriting the Python tutorial. So this is really cool. I don't think I'm really in a point here where I would be able to, but if there was a point where the community wanted to redo the tutorial, this is something that, however I can help, is something I'd like to do, because that seems like a good way to give back. But it's, unlike other projects where, like, adding documentation can actually be really helpful. I don't really think there's anything that I can do along these lines, but this is a project that I was interested in, actually partly for this reason. So it's interesting to see that the developer of this is also saying that this might actually be useful for a future version of the tutorial. Leo is it Martius? Add something with PyInstaller. Never had the issue. All right. Der Heligist. Hard times, Python 3.12 with tcod. My final update is for week 8 is fairly small. Added clairvoyant mode. Adding activated by pressing left shift with N for new game. I also made person generation recursive. Now the quest givers tell me, tell me things like, I am a criminal, I want to improve my social status, so I need to have an entertainer killed. I'm a knight, I want to improve his friend's social status, so I need to hire a traveling companion for a traveling merchant. I am a healer, I want to learn, so I need to explore a dangerous location. I am a scholar, I want to improve a friend's professional status, so I need to be accompanied on a dangerous journey. I am a strong man, I want someone hurt, so I need to have something stolen from a wanderer. Sometimes the nested person also has wants and need. I am an entertainer, I want to redeem a past mistake, so I need to have a meeting arranged with a nomad who needs to be accompanied on a dangerous journey to improve a friend's professional status. The need comes from formulas like this, where the extra headliner distinction is borrowed from Fading Suns. Tabletop role-playing game? Because I know there was a video game in this setting as well. I think they came out on GOG recently. At least I became aware of it on GOG recently. I'm sure it's probably a much older game. The idea is that other headliners will have motivations and needs, whereas extra just serve to flesh out the headliner story. So need factory friend, person extra to hire a traveling companion for friend. Okay, nope, this makes sense. Python RL, screenshot of the game. To be honest, I had quite a bit of fun making this project and showing people showing to people in the community. I want to expand the game to a full release sometime in the future. Anyways, I will want to make some builds, but I don't know how to do that. I hope you had fun with this tutorial too. So I imagine they would benefit from Hexadecimal's post above. Mr. Dave95 says, oh boy, I started this dev marathon 3 times already, and this has been the least successful one. That's for sure, LOL. I only made it through 1,5 weeks this time, as I got quite unexpectedly hit with life stuff. Completely understandable. But oh well, congratulations to everyone who made it to the end, and hopefully I will be here with a finished project one day too. Cheers. Pain Fade Down has got a GitHub repo 13.12.2, Python tcod, and anti-component system. I did not reach the end of the tutorial during this event. To be honest, I just ran out of motivation. That's a little sad. That's not a reflection on the event, the tutorial used, or anything like that, just me stuff. Anyway, I got as far as implementing health potions. Here are some screenies. This experience lent itself to my intended purpose for not closely following the tutorial, which was to learn about the entity component system and push myself out of my comfort zone for coding in Python. I think in a future instance of this event, I might like to try and learn a different language, or perhaps use a game engine. Many people went out of their way to help me, for which I am very grateful. The community associated with this game dev niche is rich and knowledgeable. I don't know how wealthy they are, but no, sorry, that's mean. Not mean, that was silly though. Was awesome seeing what other people got up to with this event. Muktuk Sex Fiend says, this was my first ever attempt at coding anything. I'm pretty chuffed to have made it to the end. However, I'm banging my head against a wall and can't for the life of me figure out how to do what I guess is something pretty simple. Return the player to the menu on death. Oh, we are of the same mind, my friend. I was rather hoping someone else had already done it so I could peek at their work. I tried adding a call to the main menu in fighter.py after the player dies, but I get an error message I don't fully understand. Import error. Let's see if we can figure this out from reading. Import error, cannot import name main menu from a partially initialized module. So that's probably under the if type checking section, I think. Most likely due to a circular import. Oh, maybe not. No, if it says from circular import, then that's... All right, let's just read the reply. You won't need main menu at import time, so change from import input handlers import main menu to import input handlers, which will break the cycle, then use input handlers main menu to access the class at runtime. Okay, so yeah, I definitely wouldn't have got that from reading that error there. Appropriate art 2388 rep Godot 4.2 playable. Thanks for hosting this. I was kind of in a rut about learning more game dev stuff, and I joined this on a whim and ended up getting interested in learning again. That's always nice to hear. I went into this without knowing much ECS or OOP, object-oriented programming, and presumably, and watching my pile of spaghetti grow each week has been a real motivator to learn more about these design philosophies. When going through the tutorial, since I was using Godot instead of Python, I mostly just read the title, skimmed the article, and tried my own thing. For the most part, I implemented all of the ideas, but in a very just get it to work sort of way, which led to the code getting very hard to work with. I almost quit on whatever week saving was on. I just did not want to work until I changed it from saving a resource to making a new resource, putting anything and everything into it, and saving that resource. I don't think I'll continue my roguelike, but maybe next year I'll actually apply the OOP and ECS concepts and have something worth building up. So Yark from Leo is it Martius or Martius? Yet another roguelike clone, Python 3.12 plus Python TCOD, Creative Commons 0. I cannot remember what the 0 is. I know it's Creative Commons, but I took a brief vacation this week, so there are no changes compared to last week. However, the project is complete according to the tutorial schedule. Being fully complete as a game is a completely different story. Aside from the obvious changes needed to implement a rogue clone instead of the more modern template in the tutorial, I made a couple of architectural changes that may be worth mentioning. I didn't have a big engine class. In fact, I don't use globals at all. All the necessary state, maybe 3 to 4 objects, is passed through function calls. This makes the code more localized, which might make it easier to manage, or maybe this approach will come back to haunt me later. I don't know. I refactored the event handler architecture from the tutorial to use a state class that represents whatever modal screen is currently shown. The class has an event method that consumes a single input event and returns a new state, or possibly self, effectively acting like a finite state machine. I may also execute actions. Additionally, the state class has a render method that renders the entire screen, calling functions from the render module. TCOD events are translated into abstract commands by an input module, while these commands are converted into actions or state changes by the various state subclasses. Thus, the state module contains the overall game logic, while the actual I/O is handled by 2 other modules. This approach is equivalent to what's in the tutorial, but in my opinion, much cleaner. For my entities, I started with a component-oriented framework like the one in the tutorial, but I ended up creating subclasses for players, armors, and weapons. This change was made to avoid having to assert the presence of certain components that should be guaranteed by the code structure. I still use components for things like monster AIs and item effects. Finally, wherever a character would be needed for a tile or entity glyph, I used an enum instead. The translation tables from enum to actual character and color are housed in the theme module. the theme module. Actually, this is kind of a neat idea. So I guess this is a little bit like storing the data in a separate file. So I imagine that you could probably do a few different themes which are entirely based on changing the contents of that one place. That seems like a kind of fun idea. The theme module is quite simple right now, but it should come in handy when I implement different UI emulations, Unix versus DOS, VGA versus VT220. Also, this was a lot of fun. So this definitely feels like a very experienced developer who's doing some more deeper adjustments. All right, and the last one here, KCE, Hobite, Rust plus TCOD, vanilla run, screenshots binary. I went through the whole Rust tutorial. That must be this one, maybe? Oh, there's a few. Oh, no, in this case, if it's TCOD, it would be this one. I went through the whole Rust tutorial. Technically, it's done. I can't say it was easy, as I barely knew any Rust when I started, but yet the bar was low, knowing nothing original about this code. Just follow the tutorial. I would love, of course, to do it in Racket, for example. There we go. Learn Lisp. Do it in Racket, for example, or add a lot of cool features and content into the game, but suppressing my ambitions was the only way to cross the finish line. I feel you. For week 8, I decided to figure out how Rust modules work and tried to split this huge blob of code onto some modules, and I did. Still a mess, but I managed to encapsulate some stuff away, e.g. object or map. There was a weird bug with menu select, so I had to fix it by ignoring the next event right after the menu pop-up. Not the most graceful fix. I wonder if anyone did it better. I tried to run Rust roguelike tutorial.exe in isolation. It needs TCOD DLL and SDL2 DLL, and also Arial font PNG and menu background. Here is the virus total link if you are you're as paranoid as you should be. Or just clone and run cargo run release yourself. Should work fine on an x86-64. Probably won't work on ARM chips, as libtcod build might fail. The goal was to finish the whole tutorial, learning a bunch of Rust in process, so I consider this run a success. Nice to see that I can still push myself to finish anything, and challenges like this is almost the only thing that keeps me motivated. I feel bad about a few of these. I'm really happy that people are getting over to the end, but I feel like you shouldn't beat yourself up too much if something comes up. Like, there's something to be said for the fact that, like, this is a for fun event, and I think that there is some value in holding yourself accountable for finishing something, like getting the thing done. But I'm not entirely sure. Like, I feel that there's a certain asymmetry in terms of like the reward for success and the penalty for failure, right? Like, when it's something fun, sometimes there's just some benefit in like play. Like, maybe you're trying to figure out whether or not you want to do programming. And it's not just a question of like, there's always going to be a hard point, right? Even if you like are doing something like playing games, there's going to be a point where you run into something that's just hard. And as the question is this thing still motivating enough to you to keep going, right? It's like Dark Souls is kind of built on this, right? There's a whole bunch of people who quite sensibly do not have any time for a game that is just going to thoroughly beat them up that way. And I am so unhappy with the whole get good meme. Like, it's just, if that is not your thing, like, isn't it so wonderful that we have so much variety in gaming now that you don't need to get good, that you can go and play something that you enjoy, and everybody else can play Dark Souls or whatever is their thing. And I sort of feel that is the same for these sorts of things, right? Like, I think there is some benefit to actually finding out whether or not this is the sort of thing that you want to spend some time doing. And it's not like, oh, here's another thing that I didn't complete. If you feel that that's something that you need to develop for yourself, I can see maybe feeling a little concerned, right? You may be getting a signal that there may be something that's stopping you from this kind of commitment to projects. Sorry, I got to sneeze. But low stakes projects, like, the thing is that life can get in the way, and other things can come up. And, it's, this is a weird analogy, but I got a message from a friend not too long ago, and they were kind of apologetic for not being not like replying right away. And the thing is, like when I talk with them, I'm usually very happy to hear from them, and I reply. Excuse me. I usually reply like within 24 hours or whatever, and there's no expectation that they reply quickly. But I can see, right, because there's like this difference in terms of timing, and I just happen to be a little bit more attached to my phone than most people. And I kind of tried to explain to them, right, like this is genuinely felt like this is someone who, um, they have a lot going on. Like they're a very interesting person, and the fact of the matter is that it's very hard to feel hard done by knowing that an interesting and active person is, not spending their time on a message, right? Like, I can only imagine that this person, for the most part, is happy and active. And because this is somebody that I admire and I like, um, I would want them to be in that state. So, I would maybe feel bad if I didn't hear them from a year or something like that. But again, this is the same idea of asymmetry, right? I'm happy to hear from them, but not hearing from them for like a week or so, um, doesn't necessarily feel bad. And that's just because for this individual, this is someone who I know that time is being really well spent and very often spent on things that they find rewarding. And so similarly for the people on this one here, right? This is the advantage of doing the roguelike dev tutorial. There's a commitment mechanism in terms of checking in every week. But if life gets in the way, or if you have other interests, there's no expectation other than your own, to land there. So I think I understand, and I think I follow. I really do feel for some of these people when they sort of feel, they express some disappointment or, a little sadness over what's going on, or lack of motivation. I really do hope that, this becomes something that gives them a charge to move forward and achieve what they're looking for, rather than it being sort of a bit of a downer. Anyways, what a grim note. I do owe a thank you though, because there was somebody in the, let's go to the archives. Actually, it's probably here. No. I bet if I search, maybe week 4. Nope, it's the following week, so 5. Gazing. Yeah, so also thank you to Gazing for, pointing out the error that I had before. All right, so this took quite a bit longer than I was originally planning, but again, I definitely feel that spending some time looking at these different projects is worth it. I'm actually going to take some time to go into all of these different repos and that, but that'll be on my own time. For those of you that have been watching from the very beginning, thank you very much for that. I was a little surprised to see the view count on a couple of these videos, because again, this is just really for me. But for those of you maybe that were participating, or for some of you, those of you that maybe said, oh, maybe I should do that, I do encourage you to do that. Whether you wait for next year, or maybe you take a look at what's here and you spend a little bit of time doing some homework before next year, whatever you wind up doing, I found this worthwhile. And I definitely have got some things that I'm going to be taking into my own work. And I hope that you maybe, I don't know if I inspire anybody, but I hope you at least find these videos a little bit of a push to go from staying on the side to kind of going in and trying this out for your own. And all that I can say is that I felt definitely a nice, welcoming community in terms of working on this, and so this would be the biggest reason to encourage you to participate in the 2025 tutorial. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next one, whenever that is. Take care.